I would just get into the car with somebody and be like, is everybody here? Do all your parents know that you're here? And I'm not going to show you 25 apartments. I'm going to show you the best 3 because I've seen them all, and then you're going to pick one at the end of the day. Got it? So no one got in my car a second time. I was a very hard closer, but that was kind of the start of the real estate passion. I think it's something that every broker, every very successful person does. They don't put off tomorrow what they can do today. The best buyers, they always put themselves in a state like they're in a 1031 at all times.
I'll tell you a quick story before we kick off. So it was about 2017 and I was working for a construction company. Okay. And it was just a desk job. I was processing invoices, doing payroll, and everywhere around me in New York, I saw greatness, and I just had no idea how to be great or how to even get on that track. So I got talking to my wife now, but girlfriend at the time, and she was like, what about real estate? You love sales, you love buildings, you should really do it. And whatever way she said it, she got me a book, I read about it, it clicked. So I started doing apartment rentals in the evening. Yeah. So I had a football team at the time, Manhattan Gales, which was like Irish guys, just moved to the city, and everyone needed an apartment, right? They wanted to rent. Then all of a sudden they were like, I actually might buy an apartment. So I was, like I said, working the day job, doing showings in the evening, got the bug. But I was sitting at my desk in probably 2016, 2017, call it 9 years ago. And I opened up Real Estate Weekly. Do you remember?
Yeah, of course. I miss it.
Yeah, right. So it was, for whatever reason, I came across it. I was like, this is a great paper. You kind of find out what's going on. Yeah. And there on the front page is Shaun Riney. And it said, I forget what it was, but it was like King of Brooklyn, Shaun Riney.
Yeah, and young buck. I think I remember that one.
And it was just a killer photo of a guy that was just crushing it, doing well, and I feel like for me, one thing I need is kind of extrinsic examples of how to do things. So when I can see something being done, it really hits home. And whatever way I read that article, I read about you, how you started. I noticed that you kind of had similarities to me. It seemed like you were from outside of town. You had done the rental game in Boston as a graduate. And I was like, man, this guy is doing literally what I could do if I just find a platform and do it. Yeah. So I want to ask you, how did you become that guy?
Well, I actually did start in the rental business, similar to you with the football club. I started a fraternity in Boston, at Boston University, and I rented my first off-campus apartment. I paid a 1-month rental fee for the lady kind of showing us the 3 biggest dumps in Allston, Massachusetts, and I had to pay a 1-month broker fee. So I was like, this seems like pretty good business, especially in Boston, because everyone has to rent an apartment by September 1st. Sure. It's like shooting fish in a barrel. So I did that in college, and I was making 6 figures, and basically that was my entry into real estate in general, and that's where I got a little bit of the fever for the deal making side. I knew every apartment in Boston. I would just get into the car with somebody and be like, is everybody here? Do all your parents know that you're here? And I'm not going to show you 25 apartments. I'm going to show you the best 3 because I've seen them all, and then you're going to pick one at the end of the day. Got it? So no one got in my car a second time. I was a very hard closer, but that was kind of the start of the real estate passion. And then I just kind of recognized rentals are great. I still think it's a great way into the business because you get used to talking to people, and you can make money in a weekend versus our business where it takes sometimes a year, as far as the business cycle. But that was where I got the itch for real estate, and then it was just how do I take it from I was making over $100,000 in college. But that was kind of the limit. There's only so much you can run around. So it's just, how do I take it to the next level? JLL, CBRE turned me down on salary jobs, or maybe they gave me an offer, but I didn't want that. It seems like we had a similar story. Both met J.D. Parker. I got lost on my way to Brooklyn, but basically liked that there was uncapped growth, and liked him as a person. And basically just hired myself. I don't think he really extended me an offer. I think I kind of just said, all right, I got it, right? When do I start? And then over time, I wouldn't say I came out of the gates the same way I am today. And I think if you're out there in your first 3 years and you haven't caught fire, don't worry about it. I caught fire once I got a taste of my first commercial transaction, and that kind of took a year and a half. So I think in the brokerage business, there's a lot of epiphanies that kind of happen, a lot of aha moments that happen along the way, and some of those are huge confidence boosters. So in your beginning of your career, you're like, maybe this is for me, maybe it isn't sometimes. Can I do this? Is this a career path? But once you get your first deal sheet out and you have an accepted offer, you get a deal in contract, you close it, all of a sudden you're like, oh, wait, I can do this. I just have to repeat the same thing over and over and over again. So I started in fall of 2008. Lehman Brothers crashed a week after. There was no manager in the office. Almost all the brokers like kind of were like half checked out. But I was told that I wasn't going to make money in the beginning anyway. So just put your head down, do 50 to 60 BOVs a year, keep doing that, water those seeds. Eventually the seeds will bloom. So I wasn't that worried. I could still tell my friends I had a job back then. But I don't think, it probably took me, I probably like hit a little like aha moment where I really got like excited about the business when I got 1102 Eastern Parkway, which was my first transaction. I brought Chaim Simkowitz, a great client, to a 16 unit in Eastern Parkway. He closed all cash. I went to the closing table. The attorney cut my fee at the table. What a scummy guy. I'm like this little guy like shaking like a leaf under the table. Stupidly went to the closing. And of course there's a shortfall. They're like, well, the broker's here. And I'm just like, I just wanted my name on the board, right? So I was just like, yes.
If you've been wondering what types of deals we've been working on,
we made it easy for you. Just click on the link, show notes below.
we're talking real deals and real opportunities.
Whether you're an investor or owner or just curious to know what's going on behind the scenes.
Just click the link below and it'll bring you right to all of our available inventory. Just pay me and let me go.
Yeah. But at that moment I was like, wait, my name's on the board. I can do this. So all of a sudden my intensity for processing comps and studying the buyers and studying the sellers, maybe I went from 50 calls a day to 100 calls a day at that point. So I feel like the business is kind of like a very heavy ball. It's very hard to get moving, but once you get it moving, the momentum can kind of just keep carrying you along.
Yeah.
And sometimes it just takes that like confidence of something breaking your way, but then you got to like parlay that quickly. Because a lot of things, as you know, in this business don't go your way. And especially in New York City, like you're going to, in the very beginning, be at that point where you're like banking on something happening and it's not going to happen. And it's like those moments where you just have to keep pushing through, because on the long arc of a career, enough will go your way that it works out. But that's where I call it the danger zone. I have a YouTube video about this because I'm like, this is where everybody stops. This is where everybody gets fearful. And you got to push through that.
Let me unpack that a little bit. So you hit on a lot of really good stuff there. Like 100 grand in college. That's not a small thing.
No, it's not. And I spent all of it on the nightclubs and an expensive girlfriend at the time. And I didn't have any money to pay taxes because I spent it all. It was 1099. So the next April, I told my dad was, paid for my college. Thank you, Dad. And I was like, I have a problem. I owe like $45,000. He was still paying like, my tuition, my books and stuff. He's like, you did what? So anyway, that was like my first learning lesson of 1099. But yeah, it was a lot of work.
So in college, unlike a lot of people, because I actually wrote a piece on this on LinkedIn about we're getting a lot of inbounds now for internships and apprenticeships. And one thing about college for me was I went to college in Ireland, did a business degree. Like you, without the 100K, I had a great time. But it was working odd jobs and doing whatever I could, but mostly just being a student. It sounds like you went, like if you earn 100K in college and you were doing something that was you just took up in college, it sounds like you had the best of both worlds. You got your degree, but you also got a life lesson. And I think a lot of the folks that are leaving college right now, you almost think you're ready. I said I was ready to be a businessman, but I knew nothing about business, right? And I feel like when you're 22 or 23, that's fine. You're not supposed to know anything. But it's the mindset of realizing you know nothing.
Yeah.
And I knew that I needed to work for a master or to apprentice, right? In maybe similar to where you grew up in Michigan, right? Yep. So I grew up in Ireland, and there was a lot of guys in my class or in school that went on to be electricians, plumbers, trades guys. And it was always known that they accepted that they would make no money for 4 years. They would do year 1, year 2, year 3, year 4, but then they would have a real business and have a skill set. And I think that's something that might be lost on folks who go to college. They almost think when they come out they're ready or they're trained.
Yeah, or they deserve something. Yeah, I mean they can barely put together an email without ChatGPT helping them. So, no, I'm with you. I mean, I just saw a market opportunity. You have to pay attention to market opportunities all the time. There's college campus. There's a lot of people. In my instance, the market opportunity was rentals, and I had started a fraternity. So, like your team, I was just like all the fraternity members rent an apartment for me. So that was like a base. And then I just, kind of expounded from there. But it was fun. I mean, you could go out on a weekend and, you could probably make 15 grand on a weekend if you rent 5 apartments at $3 grand a pop. Like, it was a fun time. I just saw it as easy money.
Why do you think you noticed it being easy money and not many others did?
Well, everyone had to have an apartment, and you basically were going to be homeless if you didn't. And you have somebody that has to have something and somebody else that's paying for that something, which is their parents usually because they're going to college. So, it's just you had a 1 month window to secure an apartment by September 1st, and everyone had to do it. And there's only so much properties available. It's a very supply constrained market. It was just easy.
But what I'm hitting on is, as an 18-year-old, a lot of guys or girls aren't thinking like this is simple supply demand, but you were. So where do you think that came from?
I think it just came from the pain of paying the broker fee the first time. It's just like, this is a lot of money for what I just saw somebody do. There's lots of examples of that today. Like if I had to do something completely different today, I'd be selling cybersecurity to very wealthy people. People pay for it on a corporate level, but I feel exposed. You're exposed.
Yeah.
Like everything's out there, all these passwords. So it just seems like for the same thing. It's like a product that people need that they don't have, and like you can kind of scare them a little bit because they should be scared. So that's just one current version of of an idea.
Yeah.
Maybe it's rent stabilized housing because the same dynamics exist, but I'm sure we'll get into that.
And we will get into that. And I think from what you're saying, it sounds like sometimes brokers are born and sometimes you become a broker, right? But it seems like you're the former, right? Maybe there was something in you, call it broker, call it cybersecurity, whatever it was. You were someone who noticed patterns and was able to execute on how to solve both sides of the equation.
Yeah, and I think I always live by kind of a phrase like, macro patience, micro speed. So you have to take a look at everything from like a long-term perspective, but that is not an excuse to walk slow and not do things at a micro speed level. So if something can be done today, do it today. Do it in the next hour. So every day, I'm working as fast as I can. I talk fast, I move fast. People in the office are like, wow, you're completely different there than outside the office. But micro speed, every day counts. But when I get home at night, I'm not going to beat myself up because this is a long game. So macro patience, micro speed, I think is something that every broker, every very successful person does. They don't put off tomorrow what they can do today because they know tomorrow there's going to be a whole nother set of things.
I talk about this all the time, a sense of urgency, right? Why not do it today if we can? I think there's so much complacency out there that I'll send it tomorrow. I'm a victim of it myself. Sometimes you get distracted, you just do other things. But if it's a simple like check the box exercise, check the box and like move on because people are watching, and whether it's people who are mentees or clients, people are seeing, does he do what he said he was going to do?
Right, 100%. Even the best buyers, right? The best buyers, they always put themselves in a state like they're in a 1031 at all times. So some people, the pressure is good. Even in my own personal experience, I've been in an exchange before, and all of a sudden, I actually made that extra call to the broker, sent that offer that I wouldn't have sent, like put those things into the universe that I otherwise wouldn't because I was in a 1031 exchange. But the buyers that we look up to, the Gary Barnett's, all of these guys, they are in that I'm in a 1031 state of mind all the time. Like they are hunting, writing offers, pursuing brokers, following up. Like, the next deal depends on their whole life. So there's versions of that with, the buyers in the marketplace too, like the people we look up to. Like they're always in that game of like, it's now. Like, let's go. Don't put off tomorrow what you can accomplish today.
100%. And so we mentioned people like J.D. Parker. We both started at Marcus Millichap. You're one of the rare cases out there, I feel like, of someone who found a firm, saw that it worked for them, and stayed and met a business there. Marcus Millichap, J.D. Parker, I feel like he's really built that type of culture there.
Yeah, I'm one of the old guard. It doesn't feel like I've been there as long as I have. But, every time there was an opportunity to switch, at least thus far, it's just like, well, yeah, somebody's going to help you with a bigger package or whatever, but you're going to lose a lot of that income in that transition. And to me, we're all kind of running our own businesses within the umbrella of a bigger business. So, we have, our own brand within the brand, and hopefully we promote the bigger Marcus brand. But to me, it was always that transition cost, and I didn't really to be honest, I don't see much difference. I don't see the grass being greener. I think, Marcus has a tremendous training program, as you described. Part of that, the downside of that is, other firms just like to wait for our guys to be 3 and 4 and 5 years, in, and just cherry pick them and save on the expense of bringing people up, which, a lot of people that have trained under me have gone on to do a lot of great things, and that makes me happy. But the training program is really, really solid, and the culture is solid. I would say the firm allows you to be. It's not as buttoned up as a CBRE or JLL, so you can kind of be a little bit of a cowboy, but, obviously within limits. But there's a very entrepreneurial culture for the most part of just allowing you to kind of experiment with different things. So it's kind of a good blend for me personally.
Thanks for listening to the Broker Brunch. We've now brought you a ton of episodes, and we hope we're providing a lot of value. If you have any ideas of people you'd like to see on future episodes, please drop it in the comments so we can make it happen. Nice. And then, so if we look at Shaun today versus Shaun back then, so in your 20s, we all have to change, right? If you kept doing what worked for you then, I'm sure you wouldn't have much balance in your life, and maybe other things would take a toll. But when you're in your 20s, at least I noticed when I was there, I always look back at those years, mid-20s as kind of your golden work years. Not that like we don't work hard now, of course we do, and we've a hell of a lot more responsibility and bills to pay. But there was a simplicity, I think, to those times, where you could really clear your head. You didn't really have clients in the same way you do now. You were trying to make marriages, you were trying to add value, you were trying to make meetings, but you could work 7 days a week, and there was really no reason not to. And I think in a business like ours, where it really is meritocracy, right? There's no reason why a 28-year-old can't be the top guy in the office. I think there's something special about our business, that you can come here with no connections. You don't have to be born into this. Some folks are, that's great. But there's an avenue for everybody in this business. For me, I wanted to learn how to make real estate my business. And because I didn't have money and I didn't have connections, what's the quickest jumping off point that I could get into this? And it was brokerage, because the buyers taught me the business.
Of course, yes, they're the professors.
They're the professors, and everybody said correctly, you have to control inventory, you need to get hired exclusively. I still stand by that today. But I think what I didn't realize, and it was probably a couple of years into it before I realized, like, the buyers are everything to me, right? They're my oxygen, because every conversation I was having with a client was basically feedback, why this works, why it doesn't. But fostering those buyer relationships, like I kind of wish I did it quicker, because I feel like I would have learned faster. And it's definitely something I try and do today. Have coffee, go for drinks, play golf, whatever it is you're into, but be around buyers, be around folks who are actually closing deals, because that's the market. That's everything.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's, I was 20s are for learning, 30s are for earning. I'm about to be 40, so I haven't figured out what I'm going to call this next decade, but, probably exponential wealth building or something along those sorts. I think the key with the business, and I think people have gotten a little soft on a lot of this stuff, honestly, like newer brokers in the business, it's, you got to make a lot of calls, but one of the things that probably is a challenge for you now, but back in my 20s, it was every night, was I used to have my best conversations with the buyers at 7:30, 8 p.m. at night after they had put their kids to bed, and it would be like, now we're going over the deals. And like, I got that sacred time.
They had the headspace.
Guys like Shulem Herman, I'd be on the phone with them for 2 hours every night from 8 to 10 p.m. And he'd be telling me, like, I'd send him off markets, on markets, but like, you have to feed the buyer something of value for them to want to return and the education. So it's not just a one-way street. But yeah, if you're a broker out there and you're not having those conversations with the most active guys, and getting your deals beat up, this is what sucks, this is what's interesting, this is good, but you priced it wrong, your assumptions on cost of construction are wrong here. Like, you have to put something out and get that feedback back, and then you in turn go to use that with your sellers. So this is partly training, but you could drop me off in Topeka, Kansas, and I guarantee you I'd learn that market in less than 12 months. And the process is not go get a listing. The process is, who are the top 10 buyers in Topeka, Kansas, make a meeting with them, go sit down with them, figure out what do you want, find out what the customer wants, and then go and get it. So once they identify, I want 1990s vintage, I want $1,000 average rents, I want garden style, whatever, I'll go database the fish that exists that fit that criteria, and then go feed it to the shark. So, but you got to start with the customer. The customer is kind of the buyer in that sense, and then go find the product that they're looking for. So that's still the case today. You got to figure out what do the buyers want, what are those characteristics, and then, you know, make that match. But, you know, a lot of what we do is just Jewish matchmaking, so we keep it simple.
Love that, Jewish matchmaking. But that really is it. And I think, you know, the piece you hit on there about what did you call it, where the broker kind of loses interest 2-3 years in, you know, the danger
zone. Yeah.
So it was, we have a lot of young brokers watch this, right? They try to break into the business. They want to learn about New York City real estate. Describe the danger zone mentality, because I think it's something we've all seen, that arc.
Yeah, so the danger zone it's very difficult in New York City, especially because the cost of living is so high. So I was told, and my business plan was, I'm not going to make any money my first year, and I got my dad to finance my existence back then. I said, by the end of the second year, I'll pay you back my carry costs, which was $3,000 a month back then. But I was told, JD, you're not going to make any money your first year. Try to, but like, don't expect to. But, you know, the second year, I should be able to cover whoever I owed back in full. So the first year I made $6,000, one deal, 1102 Eastern Parkway. This into the second year, the very end of it, I made $72,000. But I didn't have to really pay that much taxes on that because I had operating expenses and yada yada, Wall Street Journal, Real Estate Weekly, yada yada, fake. You know, but the end of that second year, I was able to like cover my debts because it was $3,000 a month times 12, 36 times 2, 72,000. But the business is really designed for that third, fourth, and fifth year to be the breakout years. Like, you just don't even know the terminology of what you're talking about yet. So it's very hard to impress somebody when you don't know the lexicon. Like, if you tried to teach me accounting, like, I might kind of get it, but like, I don't know the words. You know, same thing with construction. You know, there's just terminology. So the danger zone is exactly between month 12 and 24. Because no matter how many times I say that you need to have a business plan that's designed for the worst case scenario to be successful and don't expect to have your breakout until year 2 to 3, it's very tough in New York City to finance your existence for that long without a sustainable, predictable income. And what happens is, you know, usually around month 18, but anywhere between 12 to 24, you start to question yourself, and you're like, is this going to work out? Is it not? You are expecting something to work your way and a deal to go through, and it doesn't, and you start kind of freaking out. And as soon as you like look sideways and you start thinking, maybe this won't happen for me, then that's where you'll go. And it becomes kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy because you start chasing the low-hanging fruit and only working on the sellers that already want to sell instead of building those long-term relationships. And again, especially in New York City, and this is an open conversation and kind of argument I'm about to have with Marcus, because we have to find a way to maybe produce a draw, but like, I don't want to do a draw to a young agent in the beginning because I don't know if they're going to be worth anything. But maybe that draw starts at month 18 to 24 if they've been doing everything the right way, just to give them a little bit more runway before they have a freak out, because they're doing the right thing, because it will happen. It's just the sales cycle is long, but the cost of living is really high. So you kind of have to have a backing from someone in your family that believes in you or whatever, and just never put a time limit on the career path, because, and again, very challenging in New York City, but the thing I always told myself was I will be successful at this no matter how long it takes. No matter how long it takes was the very pivotal part. And I would tell that to myself like every day, because you cannot fail what you don't quit at. You can't fail what you don't quit at. So if you don't quit, you won't fail. You know, it eventually will happen. If you and I decided to make tables for the rest of our life, we would not be good at it for a little while, but eventually we would be good at it if we didn't quit at it. So it's the same concept, but that danger zone is where so many good brokers or people that could make it in this business, they just give up, or they start getting in their own head. Their girlfriend yells at them, their parents start to question them, they start to question themselves. And I always just tell people, expect that. Come talk to me when that happens. You know, I'll give you the pep talk that you need, because it's almost like, you know, if you want to be part of the 1% club in life, or the 1% of the 1%, these are the barriers. These are the things that the 99.9% hit, and then they go back the other way and they give up. So if you want to be part of that exclusive club, you have to like embrace those moments and be like, this is that thing that's like designed to prevent everybody else out except for the few. And then like get excited and go through that again. So, I mean, we have some guys on the team right now. I give them a lot of credit. I mean, they'll sleep on a couch right now. They're doing whatever it takes. And in particular, this market's been challenging because deals take longer to close. It's way more complex than it used to be. And the runway to get to a successful, sustainable, reliable income stream is really 3 to 4 years. Now, you can get lucky. You can get put on deals. You know, we have a lot of opportunities. But even if that happens too, there's some examples of guys that have early success and they're like, oh, this is easy. And then they stop making the calls, stop doing the proposals, stop adding the value to the clients. So, yeah, I did a YouTube video about it because I just, instead of doing what I'm doing now, I just say, watch this, and then before the second interview, like, how do you get through the danger zone? Like, do you have the staying power? And again, super hard. If we were in Missouri or some place where the cost of living is lower, a lot easier to have that runway, but here it's very expensive.
But that's what makes it, right? Because you know when you make it here, it's like the Sinatra song, right? You literally could make it anywhere.
Yeah.
And that's part of the allure to New York City. That's why you and me are here.
Yeah, now I'm questioning, it's like if you can make it in New York City, why don't you just go do it somewhere that's a lot easier?
And absolutely crush it, right? Why do we do this to ourselves? But I think another factor on top of what you're saying, for young people, right, their parents love them, right? You never want to see your loved one go through pain. And all of a sudden their little boy or their little girl, it's like, I'm not making any money. I'm working my ass off. You know, my mentor is, not bringing me on enough meetings. Like, name your excuse. Mm-hmm. But all of a sudden, of course, like, and especially if mom and dad haven't been in the business, like, yeah, you gave it your best shot. Like, it's okay to stop. Like, you should print off your resume. And, Johnny down the street is earning 100,000 at PwC, and he has his weekends, and he seems like a happy kid. But all of a sudden, this kid who is trying to do something bigger and feels like they're almost there, every part of their life is now telling them to stop. People who love them, people they trust, and you should always like take everyone's opinion on board. But at the same time, if you want to do something that is exceptional, or is that pushing the limits of where you are or where you want to be, you have to go through that pain.
Yeah, 100%.
You have to feel it.
It's a personal decision. You got to make sure you're in the right driving seat. But if you do feel like you're in the right seat, it's just a matter of pushing through.
Correcting course maybe, but not just like, I don't want to be a broker anymore. And it's fine. If you don't want to be a broker, don't be a broker. But don't say
that it's somebody else's fault. Yeah,
exactly.
There's always a level of intensity you can turn up. I just had this conversation. Even, I think you just hit on something that's also very good if you're a young broker out there. It's the self-reflection aspect. So, it's every time I ask somebody how'd the meeting go, oh, great, just great, what, you're not learning anything from that. The guy might have just been like trying to shoo you away because,
in a hurry. Who sold who?
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
But I would, just like Tom Brady can't remember every play, he looks at his forearm. I mean, I don't know how you're a cold caller today, and I'm not the best cold caller anymore because I don't do it as much. But I used to just like write out my questions almost like on my hand to know where to go because I couldn't remember them on the fly. And even a question, if you change the syntax of the words within the question and frame it differently, will produce a different response. So like there's a science to like how to get people talking and open-ended questions.
So true.
And if you're out there and you're like, well, I'm not getting meetings. Well, how deeply are you studying the way that you're talking, recording yourself, experimenting with a different set of questions, maybe completely changing it altogether? But you got to find what fits because you can get meetings with people. I mean, you can definitely make an entrance, but you just gotta like tweak it. And I feel like a lot of people are just very blindly going about their day-to-day, sounding like the same robots that they heard in the bullpen or in the training room. But it's like you got to do something different to stand out. You got to do something
different, and it's not as hard as you think either. Sometimes we overcomplicate this business. You're somebody who speaks very plainly about the business and boils down complicated things into like simple everyday language, which is the way it should be. And whenever someone asks me like, oh, I can't get a meeting, I have no value, I was like, why don't you call the person who owns a building, tell them what the last 3 similar buildings sold for, ask them, did they know what the price per foot was? Did they know what that means about their property? Do you have any questions? I'm in the area. Let me come by and like show you exactly what is going on in the area.
Right.
You're going to need me in the future. You're not a seller today. I get it. You're not a seller. But one day you're going to wake up and you're going to need something. And the only way that I'll have earned my spot to be your broker is by doing this kind of work now, making sure you're informed, making sure you know what's going on out there. If you never hire me, no problem. But this is what I do, it's all I do, and I'm out here doing it. Thank you for listening to the Broker Brunch. If you enjoy the show, please hit subscribe so we can reach more people.
Yeah, and people will just want to know the stories, you know.
The stories.
And another way to think about it is, what's the biggest pain point in the marketplace at that time? And it might not just be sales comps. It might be, you know, how to overcome a rent regulation problem. I used to close people on how to get their property taxes lowered. So back in the day, you know, a lot of, like, especially mom and pops had these outrageous tax bills, and they just weren't filing their RPIEs. And so I figured out that was why. I'd make a meeting with them, show them, fill out the form with them, send it in, and their property taxes would get lowered by half. And I was like, yeah.
And you were the guy who
helped.
helped.
I was the guy that helped, and there's no pushing. Hey, we did a valuation. Now we can do the valuation plus $700,000. When that person decided to sell, you know, 3 years later, they didn't mind paying a 6% fee. Like, I'd made them, you know, a ton of money. Yeah. So there's all kinds of examples of that. But even if it's just comps, I mean, the marketplace, all this technology, it's like, yeah, you can see a comp on Traded, but, like, you got to know who the buyer was, what was the story. Okay, the Japanese are buying. Why are they buying? What are the cap rates? And those are the things that are really interesting to clients in the marketplace. But yeah, making it relevant to to them, solving their pain point, answering the most common problems in the marketplace. They're all very easy ways in. And then the hard part, as you know, you can get in once, but you gotta, how to maintain contact. Easy to do when you have 10 people. Very difficult to do with 1,000 people. That's partly why we're here right now. Maybe somebody listens to get those impressions. But it's a very simple business that's very complicated to execute on a massive scale. And that's always what we're trying to put out with value-added kind of content and stuff like that. But yeah, it's a very simple business when we really think about it.
And it's David Schwartz, Slate Property Group. So he said it to me, and I think it really hit the nail on the head. So. And he didn't say the first part about like just brokers learning numbers. We can learn numbers, right? We can learn average numbers, price per foot, but knowing what intrinsic value is, that's a different conversation.
Nuance, yeah.
And it's almost like year 3 for me anyway. Like year 3, year 4, after speaking to enough people, walking enough buildings, rather than just knowing that the average price is $400 a foot, I now knew why maybe one might be actually worth $550 a foot.
Right.
But the comps aren't going to tell me that because I know what's going on in the neighborhood, or I have a piece of information. So I think as brokers, one thing that can really put you ahead of other brokers is learning intrinsic value. So take it off the Excel sheet, learn that part first, get enough to be dangerous, do your meeting, show people that you can memorize information, but then actually learning. And you said, I think, about investing. So I think a lot of brokers, that's where they ultimately want to get to. I'm sure investing has made you a better broker.
Definitely. A lot of experiences with that. Yeah, the nuance of like the feel of a building, and even with our own listings. I mean, you got to like tour them, drive by them. I mean, there's a feel to everything. One building that's mid-block is going to be a different feel than a corner, with windows and the light and air, the configuration. Like a left-right railroad apartment is a lot less desirable than a front and back apartment that has box layouts. Like, if you don't have to change the plumbing lines, the electric lines in a renovation, that's going to change the renovation costs a lot. So there's a lot of nuances, and that's why the best buyers are who they are too, because they're feeling the real estate, and you can only get that feel for things if you tour enough buildings and then track them. So it's very important to like know what sold, and the best buyers, again, in the marketplace, they're always hitting me up like, who bought it? What did they see that I didn't see? Why did they pay more? Like, did I miss something? They're very inquisitive. But yeah, on the personal investing side, I've done a bunch of different stuff. I'm still kind of an investor in Rent Stabilized right now. I just took a big slug of something in Williamsburg that we just put under contract. I only buy from other broker deals, never on my own, and never anything that I have anything to do with. But I think it's a good thing for a broker, because obviously you're selling properties. You want to have a belief that this is a good thing that people are buying. I think there's a tremendous opportunity in Rent Regulated right now. We can dive into that. I've had a lot of success in the Southeast with my former broker partner, Peter Vondre, who's now buying really quality cash flowing assets in Georgia and Florida. And those have all made a return every single month like clockwork for all the reasons. He was a great broker. He's a great operator. I think he's now just expanding the kind of the Rolodex, building new, done a bunch of stuff in Florida. Haven't had as much success in like value added, free market or anything value add. Somehow like in the renovations, everything kind of just gets lost and it's a wash. But I like Core Plus, doing a side project in Montauk just to kind of get some depreciation. That's been a whole learning curve in the last 12 months, just really understanding construction, having to deal with some bumps in the road and just learning a lot, but it's kind of fascinating to me to learn some of that hands-on type of stuff. So yeah, it definitely informs and helps you become a better broker. But even before that, you got to kind of know how to communicate to a buyer, like how are you going to make money? And a lot of times, people don't go to that higher level. They're just looking at the sales comps, but really what the other comp that's relevant is the debt comp. So when somebody refinances a building, that is a sale. The bank is basically buying a part interest in the property. So even if there's no sale and you see like a loan to value or let's just say a $70 million loan on a new construction building, maybe you go get the financials from that seller. The value, maybe they plugged it at 100 million, they did 70% LTV, but I was always educating buyers and interested in what was the debt yield on that $70 million mortgage. Because if I could show if the debt yield was 7%, okay, to refi all of your money out on a deal, you just got to build it to a 7% cap rate. So if the general best case scenario is, all right, we're going to do a value add project and refi all of our money out, I wanted to show a buyer, if I can show you a way to a 7 cap, like this bank over here just lent at a 7% debt yield, like if I can get you to a 7 cap, you're going to refi all of your money out and have a free building. So it's like, and there's another deeper level of even comps that aren't sold comps because your other exit is the refi. So you have to kind of know how the banks are underwriting these buildings. And if you can explain to a buyer that side of things, when you're pitching them a new deal, they're like, oh, this guy's next level.
Yes.
I'm going to take him seriously.
He's talking debt yields.
Yeah,
which is
when
our
his
cap
email
rates.
shows up, I'm going to actually read the OM. So a lot of times now it's not really, some clients I'm like, do you filter by broker name or like subject line of a deal? And almost always now they're like broker name. Like some Jamoki could send them 25 cap in East Harlem and they still wouldn't open the email because they know it's not deliverable. They know this is just an idiot.
Right, it's just hair all over the
place.
But
if you have a track record, or if you're in the comps, if people know that you have a history of closing deals, they might not love the price, but they're going to take you seriously because it's not going to be a waste of their time to bid on it. Like there probably will be an end result because what buyers hate more than anything is just spending time on a deal that never even sells.
So this is really interesting, right? So you've built up this credibility, and all good brokers do that, right? You build up credibility with the buyers that I won't try to sell you something that I wouldn't at least have a story or a thought process of why it makes sense.
Yeah.
Right? So people don't necessarily, sometimes it's not even the story, it's the storyteller.
Yeah, correct.
Right? It's the broker bringing them, because when they see that name, they know that there's a certain level of, let's call it sophistication, has gone into it to get it to this stage. So it's worth me spending 20 minutes of my time to give feedback here.
Yeah. I want to get into the market kind of questions because I want to know what's happening in your world because, high level, I think everything that we're selling in 2025 is going to be a win for the buyers. This is a buyer's market. Cap rates in New York City are as elevated as I can remember since 2010, 2011, 2012, when people were buying 7 caps in place. There was obviously the IAI system back then, and a few things went their way. But when you can buy at cap rates that are this kind of high historically, and there's any type of play or any type of potential lever for future growth, i.e. in rent stabilization, to me it's the makings of a lot of, we're going to sell this deal twice. And a lot of these sellers even know it, or they think it too, but they just can't hold on. So there's so many great assets that are on sale just because of a capital markets issue. It's not like the building's in a problem state. It's just that, the refi options are not good. No one wants to pay down a deal that they already invested into because they think it's good money after bad, even if it's not. There's just a psychology to that. And it's just creating a lot of, kind of opportunity. Where do you see, like if you sold anything this year, like that was 100%, great deal, or are you selling anything now that's 100% great deal?
So one deal that stands out that we closed in March was a retail deal.
Okay.
Below $5 million, but it had the mom and pop tenants who had been there for, one of the delis had been there for 40 years.
This is in the Bronx?
This was Dykeman Street in Inwood.
Okay.
So it borders like Washington Heights, Inwood. But there's a great stretch on Dykeman that a lot of folks don't know about. And it's like a really like heavy footfall, lot going on. You could go there at 10 a.m. on a Tuesday morning. It's just activity.
Amazing.
You know, and people are spending money. You don't have, you know, Target or Chick-fil-A, but you have like the coffee guy, the laundromat, the Chinese, the clothes fashion store. So there's just a lot of activity. And the buyer for that was, so it ended up all the local folks came in because nothing really comes up for sale. So they were all like, yeah, I'll pay ask.
Because they know.
They know.
Yeah.
So rents were $50 a foot. Everyone knows it's $65 a foot in the market. The owner profile checked the boxes because they were not in real estate. It was the classic story of someone had bought the building 40, 50 years ago. Now all of a sudden it was left to the kids. They had so much different things going on in their life. Real estate wasn't one of them. Regulation started catching up on them, things they had to do for the building, maintenance. And it was just like, you know what? Let's sell, let's monetize.
So what kind of cap rate starting out that trade at?
So we listed it at about a 6.25 cap, which, you know, you probably want to see it 7.5 today, right? For really people, but 6.25 on the basis that the rents were undervalued, that there was meat on the bone here. We got all the local buyers said ask price, we'll pay ask. So I knew that we had a price properly. All of a sudden, a very active buyer, owns probably 150 properties, never had anything in Upper Manhattan, called me and said, Brian, I'll pay you above ask. Right. So now we had like a good old fashioned bidding war, which for a mom and pop, felt great. I was like, this is what it's about, you know.
Finally.
But, yeah, exactly. And the family it was one of those situations. It was like selling for, you know, people you wanted to really do well for, because you knew it was their one swing at it. So we got. One offer was, say, 100K above ask, but this particular buyer did everything that was asked of him. Did the phase one ahead of time, you know, had his title report done, was ready to post the 10% hard. We sent out blank contracts, blank deposits. He sent his back in 24 hours later. Everything was buttoned up. He was above ask, and he was ready to go. So it was just like, I think that's where we're heading for again in the future. We don't know when, but because we're in New York City, because this is where people want to be, if you're a broker now and you can survive this market and have little experiences of that kind of thing, 5-10 years time when things are really humming and when you have those relationships, it's such an incredible opportunity to get in right now.
Oh, 100%. It's never a bad. Same thing with the buyer and the owners, by the way. You know, the peak to peak in New York City is always higher. So the next peak historically has always been higher than the previous peak. Now that might not be the case in every major city. I'm sure it's not the case in, you know, certain pockets of Detroit or whatever. They've gone through cycles, maybe the last. But in New York City, it's always true, and somehow it'll be true again. And so I've talked to some of my partners, you know, Signature Loans and whatever. You know, but if you can survive through this period and not lose assets, or lose one, but like in the general scheme of things, not go down to ashes, chances are you're gonna just be in boom times, you know, again in the future. But you got to manage your way through it somehow. And same thing with brokers. There's a magical time in the up cycle where the market's going up, the buyers feel that, the sellers are just happy with $5 more than the last BOV that they had. And there's like an 18 to 24 month window there where it's like a magic carpet ride where both people are very happy and eager to get to a closing table.
Everyone is.
And everything just is smooth. The attorneys, everything's humming, right? And so there's part of the opportunity in New York City is there's so many pent up seller demand. It's like a rubber band that's just so tight. Like you talked about, like these people, it's like pickles past expiration date in the refrigerator. Like we're ready. Like we've been ready. We're just not selling at the absolute bottom. But if something picks up a little bit, like we're ready to go. And you know, I think the buyers will be there. Whether that's interest rates dropping a little bit, just a slight change in the mechanisms of certain kind of laws. So that will happen eventually, and just you want to be in the right seat as a broker or a buyer and have the infrastructure around you to kind of tap into that because it will happen at some point. And that's kind of what I'm looking forward to, a little bit, because buyers are still scared when they buy stuff for the most part. I mean, they're like, maybe this works out, maybe it doesn't. That's difficult. Cap rates are I would say on the whole between 6 and 7%. There's some stuff at higher cap rates than that for sure, but like a quality building, whether it's a strip center or an apartment building, 6 to 7, and the debt's 6% or higher. So it's not like there's a huge spread. But the cap rates are still elevated. Trump's working hard on getting the interest rates down, and usually he gets his way. So at some point, maybe that just happens, and it's a magical kind of ride again.
Yeah, listen, you bring up Trump, and obviously your whole business, I would say the bulk of it is rent-regulated multifamily, right? That's your bread and butter. We'd be remiss not to hit on this, right? So in 2019, the world changed, right? And they brought out legislation which basically really high level just took the upside off of deals and limited what you could raise your rents to. All of a sudden you had frozen rents, but you had increasing operating costs. Mm-hmm. So put landlords in a very difficult position. Rather than give you the, you take the why we shouldn't have rent regulation, sometimes really great debate coaches tell you have to debate the other side. So why is rent regulation important?
I think I think protections on tenants is fine. I think there's just a middle ground that has to happen. I would like to see us have a California system of rent regulation, which is very simple. Upon a vacancy, do whatever you got to do to bring it to as much habitability and marketability as you want. You want to go high end, do it. You want to go medium grade, do it. The next tenant that signs that lease has a certain type of affordability, stabilization component where their rent can't be raised more than a certain percentage year over year. But it locks in a affordability and maybe a security for that tenant in time. The current system just penalizes even vacant apartments. It's penalizing ghosts. It's just completely nonsense. So all we have to do is flip to a California system where you can set a market rate on a vacant apartment, and that next tenant has some security about where they're living with nominal increases tied to inflation or whatever have you. So I guess maybe similar to good cause eviction on free market apartments, I guess right now. And that would be fine. I think things got out of control. Like I remember, Rafael Toledano, I remember the New York Times article. There were some really bad apples with very few percentage points that were just taking advantage and creating maybe some conditions that led to buyouts and surrenders, and that gave the industry a really bad kind of name. But all things have to swing back to just a little common sense. I think there's something beautiful about a tenant having some ability to have some security in their home.
Right.
And I would say even without rent stabilization, most owners are happy with their current tenants, and they just want the normal kind of increases. They need to have a profit, but they like stability, and they embrace the whole diversity of income streams. I mean, developers, as you know, I'll build all affordable, I'll build homeless shelters, I'll do whatever. I just need to have a profitable kind of enterprise, but I want to create things, and I want to provide shelter for people. The scary and sinister part about the whole system right now from a human side point, and why do we have regulations, or when regulations go too far, is, these buildings are a big part of somebody's life, right? Like it affects their day to day, right? If a building doesn't have heat, in the wintertime, and you have to take cold showers, or there's mice running around, you don't feel good. So like a building that falls into disrepair, and that's a 40-unit building, is now causing 40 different families' lives to be impacted negatively on a day-to-day basis, which then maybe leads them to not have a great relationship with their kid or whatever. So it's such a sacred thing that we're actually trying to regulate here. And all that we need is an ability to maintain these buildings at a certain level of profitability, no different than a grocery store, no different than a hospital. So I just think some of the argument has to kind of shift to understanding the impact of what a deteriorating building actually means to the human beings that live in it, because that's what's happening in the Bronx and in Brooklyn. Manhattan is fine because it's mostly free market, units, but these buildings are falling apart and there's no money left. It's like tossing money into a bonfire, fixing the little things. You'll keep the boiler working in the big things as long as you can, but people are defaulting left and right. So the next mayoral race is huge. There's 50,000 plus vacant apartments that are just boarded up. Plus, I have some of them myself. Like it's just, there has to be a move to the middle, and I just think that human element. It doesn't have to be tenant versus owner. So some level of regulation is probably good in a city like this. Just has to be kind of tacked back to the middle. Hopefully, Cuomo, if he's the front runner, gets in and, admits he, kind of signed this law into place and it's had disastrous effects, which it has.
That's funny because it was him in 19, right, at the state level. It would have been, well, he had to sign the bill, but, but it wasn't kind of started under his watch.
Yeah, it wasn't his bill. Like, if it was his bill, I'd be more scared. I mean, he was just like, all right, if you guys pass it, I won't veto it. He's a political career politician. He probably thought he'd become governor again and not be ousted.
Right.
And he could always revert it back a little bit. And, if it went too far, he would be in a position to actually influence things back.
Yeah.
So, you can't change the rent laws. But again, to the rent stabilized opportunity, dare I say today's prices, they're low enough where you can kind of deal with all the stuff that's happening. So, I mean, if you're buying something with, $1,400 average rents at a 6.5% to 7.5% cap rates in a good neighborhood, it feels right. I think you can survive, and kind of the underwriting's good enough to like get by. So I think we're at a place where this is actually kind of a bet where you don't need to have meteoric upside day one to get involved in this asset class. And then again, if any one of these levers change, you have a position to dramatically maybe increase the net income. There's certainly a lot of reasons to shy away, that capital expenditures, but it's a feel thing, like you mentioned. Is this building well taken care of by the previous owner? Did they reinvest in the property? If they didn't, am I baking all those fixes in on the front end to my strategy so that I can provide that safe, affordable living for every single person? I think at today's prices, you can. So I feel like it's the opportunity of a lifetime if you want to roll up your sleeves, have that human touch. You can buy them well enough. And I think, in my opinion, like anything that can be a 7% cap on cost, including all those improvements post-closing, in a good area that feels right, might be a good way to kind of hedge a little bit of a bet. And people are doing that. There's no funds doing it, but you have the private families that, we're just sold one on Linden Boulevard to a family from LA. We, had a couple in Astoria that we just sold to some locals. I mean, there's people cherry picking at today's prices. Will they go a little bit lower? They definitely can. But like, it's hard to time the absolute bottom. I feel like we're in the bottom 20% of what's possible. And I think office has already hit the bottom. So you can't.
We're back. Another season of the Broker Brunch podcast. Summertime in New York. We've got a lot of exciting conversations coming up. We hope you enjoy listening.
And you'll only know in the rearview mirror, right?
Yeah.
It's only when we're out of it that you'll realize that what I could have done. Our mutual friend, Peter Hungerford, right? He's someone who makes the case for what you're saying, right? Can I change light bulbs? Can I fix toilets? Can I rent out apartments? Check, check, check. Can I borrow at a couple of percent below what my return needs to be? So can I borrow at 6 and make 8%? Check, check, check. And those kind of guys, like you said, the smaller families, they're scooping up units right now. I think those are the guys in 10, 15 years that we will ultimately look back and say, wow, like, of course they did amazing. But right now, it's not that clear.
Not clear at all.
So many variables that could turn. But I do feel in my bones, just knowing New York and knowing cycles, that I haven't really experienced cycles, but, understanding the way things go, that they're going to be happy with what they did. A really sad part of what you said is these apartments being warehoused. I mean, I don't think that a lot of folks really understand that part. If I can't fix up the apartment, so if Shaun is living in my apartment for 50 years, right, and now Shaun is not there anymore, that apartment is going to be in really, really rough shape. I mean, you can't swing a hammer in an apartment now for less than, 25 grand, 30 grand. Kitchens, bathrooms, like it's going to be 6 figures. So for anyone who doesn't quite understand this, a legal rent on one of these apartments could be $500-600. Right? Now all of a sudden I have to put 150 grand into this unit, and all I can do is rent it for the 500 is like the benchmark number, and I'll get some sort of percentage off that. But what you're explaining is in California, if you go, right, we're not saying take it out of regulation or make it destabilized the way it used to be, but still keep it stabilized at some sort of AMI or whatever the apartment would rent at, and then stabilize every lease beyond that. And I think every side or both sides can agree that makes sense, because now all of a sudden you take those 50,000 units, you put them back on, and like you said at the very start of this, when you were renting apartments in college, it's supply demand. The more supply you have out there, the lower those rents will be, because it's just more competition.
Yeah.
Right now we've taken them offline, they're not there, so now the the stock minus those 50,000 is your market.
Yep.
So all these units are missing. I think that's, once you go beyond the headlines, like that's the really sad part, that there's units there that people could be living in that they're not.
Right. So like some of the buildings that are for sale are, a 40-unit building with maybe 7 of these apartments that are just vacant, boarded up. And the prices are based upon just the last registered rent. But if somebody could hold those units vacant until some common sense returns, and then they can mark to market those units, they just bought a 7 cap that can turn into a 9 cap. Or you buy a building that, maybe is a 7 cap on the rents that are collected, but has some arrears problems. A new owner can go in there. Some people, some tenants are just not interested in, fixing anything and just not interested in paying rent. But there's also a category that if there's a human touch and a new owner that's visiting the building, knocking on the door, hey, new owner, what's the issues? I'm going to come here with my crew. That tenant sometimes can immediately start paying the rent again. Maybe they still get some money from the government in the back rent, but I've sold some buildings in the last 3 months where the cap rate was really high and there was a couple units in arrears, and that's why the cap rate was high, because people were like, I'm not touching that. You get 2 units of 16 in big court. I talked to the buyer. He's like, it just happened to be, I went to the building and the tenant was there and I just struck up a conversation, and I did the work the next day, and she's paid all the back rent, which was like $37,000, and is paying like clockwork now. But for the previous seller, they were just looking at it like, give it to my L&T attorney. This person's a psycho. There's no hope, or I just don't care enough anymore. I'm so over New York City to even, try to make that human to human connection. But like that buyer just turned around that deal just by being there. So that's hard to do on 6,000 units. But if you're buying one building that's problematic, you just question like, why are these people not paying the rent? Like if I even solve the issue for 50% of those issues, that might be some of my value add. So that's partly what Hungerford is identifying too in some of these institutional portfolios where these people's heads are spun. Like they can't possibly even get that granular at this point. And if you do that, you can kind of stabilize the income. And again, buying at a high enough cap rate where if anything goes right, you can really stand to gain. I mean, we were selling buildings for under $100,000 a unit, double-digit price per square foot. I mean, the metrics are extremely cheap. So I think it's a buying opportunity. I mean, I think you see that with office too. Like as soon as there was a couple trades at the bottom, now everything's a little bit higher. So office already hit bottom, maybe rent stabilized depending on the mayoral election and RGB increases. But as soon as there's a mechanism to give some life back to these buildings, I mean, you're going to have competition again, and a little bit healthier of a valuation standpoint. So it's good pickings. No, but you're 100% right. We'll be clicking around, and how did this guy get this so cheap 10 years from now? Or the new brokers will be saying that.
It's like the old timers say to us, I could have bought that building in 95 for $100,000. Mm-hmm. And you're like, oh my God, like what a time to be alive. But this is the time we have. Mm-hmm. And no one ever thinks they're living in the good old times, right? Mm-hmm. But there's a really good chance that in 20 years, right now, today, will be the good old times.
I think sooner than that. You said 5 to 10 years. I think sooner than that. Just to get further granular, I think Core Plus is a great strategy right now. I mean, these 35-year tax-abated buildings that were built in the last 3 to 4 years under the old program. How do you lose in New York City? I'm selling one on Wythe and South 2nd right now for a 6 cap flat. I got another one on Wythe Avenue in Williamsburg. But there's some prime 35-year tax-abated new construction buildings. They're brand new, that you can pick up at 6 to 6.5% cap rates in good areas. And my question to you and the buyers is, how do you lose, just given natural inflation of rents, because there's no, on the 70% free market, you can raise the rents, and you have no real estate tax increase for 30 years. How do you not grow the NOI? The utilities are passed through to the tenants. They pay their own heat and AC, which is the second biggest expense. And the taxes are zero for 30 years with a phase out. So like a lot of people just still aren't buying them because I make money in 3 to 5 years. I got to show the model. Like it's hard to know if you're going to get those rent jumps enough in the first 3 to 5 years. But if you take that out 10 years, God willing, 15 years, like you're going to have major NOI growth. Outside of insurance spiking, like the biggest 2 expenses are zero taxes or capped because it's passed through the tenant with fuel. So I think there's an unbelievable opportunity for Core Plus right now. because of those reasons. Average rents just go up. 35 years ago was basically when I was born. Like, what do you think the rents in Williamsburg were in 1985? Like, they weren't $9,000 a month. Like, they just go up. So I like that category. I think the hybrids, the half free market buildings, half rent stabilized, are a great opportunity that currently lacks a buyer profile, because you got to kind of get in the weeds with the rent stabilized. But it's like the best of both worlds. You have, and again, 6 to 7% cap rates. We have a portfolio in Astoria right now that's got that perfect 50-50 blend. The free market rents will go up. You got that upside. And then if anything changes with the laws, you have 50% rent stabilized. Yeah, you have a hedge both ways. But it doesn't have a tremendously strong buyer pool and bench, because the people that are raising money, their investors, are generally like just nix-nay on rent stabilized for obvious reasons, because they hear the headlines. Yeah. And then on the free market side, you still got to review the III paperwork and just kind of have a little bit of a nuanced, okay, I feel good enough about the background here where I'm covered. Nothing's going to be perfect, and the world's not perfect, but it's also like a nuanced kind of thing. But I think those are tremendous opportunities, because you kind of have the best of both worlds. But they're not easy to wrap a investment strategy around. Where I think the least kind of honestly like the profit is the value add free market. Like I see, again, like for the most part, the numbers you're building into maybe a 6 or a 7% cap on costs after all that work. Yeah, it'll be a brand new building, which has a lot of benefits, but why build into the same cap rate that you can buy at day one, other than if your business is construction management and, yada, yada, you're trying to build a portfolio. Like, I get it, but, you have 95% of the market chasing that 5% of the product. So when everyone's rushing at the exact same thing, you're probably buying into an inflated asset
bubble.
Class.
Yeah.
So it's just like, let the ball do the work. I feel like more LPs out there need to call their GP right now. If you're listening to this, be like, don't worry about the value add. Like, I want to buy what Shaun Riney said. Just buy the things in place. I'll still pay you the acquisition fee. Like, we'll sell it when rents go up a little bit and cap rates go down a little bit and interest rates drop a little bit. And like, the easy money is probably in that category. But, everyone wants something to do.
I want to talk to you about Brooklyn.
Yeah.
Right, because Brooklyn has had a phenomenal run. I've been lucky enough to do some deals in Brooklyn. We've done development sites there. We've done mixed use. We've done retail. It just feels like it's a city within a city.
Yeah.
And I drove out there a few weeks ago. I drove all along Atlantic Avenue, and you can see like where the city has grown. It's weird. It's like, you're in a northeast city. Mm-hmm. You don't necessarily think it's New York anymore. It's like it has its own feel. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. There's obviously a serious culture out there. I think Brooklyn is a brand, mm-hmm. right, the world over. If I go to Ireland, people know Brooklyn, yep. right? It's just known. So it's its own animal. I would say you caught it on.
Perfect.
It was the precipice, right? It was just
mm-hmm. beginning
to rise, and you rode a wave with Brooklyn, which was phenomenal. For you, and like I feel like you've really probably got to grow up being a Brooklyn broker, and now all of those people who were buying back then, they're seasoned owners, and you've kind of all come up together and rode the wave. In Brooklyn today, where do you see opportunity?
I mean, I think anything along the waterfront is still going to be like lined with gold eventually. I think Williamsburg and Greenpoint, as expensive as it already is still just every tax lot is gold. I think the townhouses will be selling for West Village prices at some point. They'll go for $2,500 to $3,500 a foot when they're fully finished. And people are now catching wind of that, but you can still kind of probably buy something that's relatively nice for $1,200 a foot on like a townhouse type style. I just think the income demographic of the people moving to Williamsburg and Greenpoint are leaving more expensive areas in the city, and they still see relative value in Williamsburg and Greenpoint, so it has its way to go up. I personally have lived in Williamsburg for 10 or 11 years, different apartments, but every time I think about leaving, it's like the L train is gold, you can get anywhere. You got this neighborhood feel with still the ability to have a car, and and everything around you is constantly changing quite rapidly, so it always feels new. So I still love Williamsburg and Greenpoint. We can touch on Queens in those areas too. Bushwick I think is still overlooked, but I still love the L train aspect. The rent law has slowed down all that growth. Like there's a lot less investment into those streets because you just can't do anything with the rent stabilized apartments. But again, if that turns long term, the L train is still the best train line in the city. It dices across the city. It's the quickest. I live in Williamsburg. I can get to Grand Central in 15 to 20 minutes, and I know exactly when the train's coming. It's very easy. So the L train is always the line of gold, and I still think Bushwick and Ridgewood have a lot of value. There's just a lot of smaller properties, and it's hard for people to like really scale. But like pound for pound, the rents compared to the price the buildings sell at, if there's like a ratio that I should probably define what that ratio is, I think it would have one of the best scores. Anything along that Atlantic Avenue terminal, area where it just got rezoned, and Crown Heights, Prospect Heights, Clinton Hill. I mean, that should be a game changer. We just sold 918 Atlantic Avenue on the corner of Washington, and that buyer took a chance a year ago before the rezoning passed and essentially bought the land for $100 per buildable square foot because he took those chances. But that whole stretch is going to be high rises, which then leads to better retail, which then just leads to better amenities on an otherwise kind of more manufacturing, kind of block. Park Slope is beautiful. You can still find very good value there. South Slope is on the up and up. The Cobble Hill, Carroll Gardens, Brownstone market, again, similar to Williamsburg, the wealthier Manhattan neighborhoods are finding relative value still at today's prices, and the taxes are a lot lower in those neighborhoods than, equivalent West Village, Greenwich Village, or whatever. You can still buy a brownstone at, the $7,000 tax bill. So that is exploding, and they can't create more supply. So if you're just like, I want to buy a true, brownstone property in an area that like everybody wants to live in and everybody's always going to want to live in, it's Carroll Gardens, Cobble Hill, Brooklyn Heights, Fort Greene, because everything's R6B zoning, which means you basically can't build anything new. So like you're just not going to have competition. So a lot of these brownstone Brooklyn markets with that type of zoning, I kind of try to equate to people as like oceanfront real estate. It's like you can't get more of it, and it's kind of just through natural inflation, unless New York City somehow doesn't have the same demand of people wanting to live in it, will kind of get better. And again, the sadder part is like a lot of the areas that were getting better in Brooklyn without the rent laws changing or the tax abatement on new development really catching wind, like they're kind of like plateaued. Some are regressing, to be honest, because you need that new investment into neighborhoods. You need somebody wanting to open a new bodega that's brand new, or a new grocery store, or, you don't want to see buildings that are abandoned on a block, and that's what's happening in certain pockets. But yeah, it's basically the north part of Brooklyn. If they ever improve the transit line of the R train to get to Bay Ridge, from Bay Ridge all the way to downtown Brooklyn, if they speed that up, which, you would think that they would have enough money to do, I mean, that's like a suburb within the city. It's beautiful, beautiful homes and just that feel. You kind of feel like you're not in the city, but you are. And the only drag from a rental standpoint why rents haven't gone through the roof and why more people aren't choosing that neighborhood is just because it probably takes 45 minutes to get to downtown Brooklyn on the R train. So they speed that up, though. I kind of like that, buying a nice Bay Ridge apartment building, it just feels good down there. But if I was just like, I raised $10 million and I have to decide on any neighborhood to overpay in, maybe is the best way to put it, I would still say Williamsburg and Greenpoint.
Still has runway. Wow.
East Williamsburg probably specifically because, again, it's not as like crazy as Northside, but it's the same renters. It's basically the same rents. I live on Metropolitan and Lorimer on the other side of the BQE now, and like I prefer that to like the north side, where I used to live, because it's still got all the authentic Italian, restaurants, and it's not Hermes now. I used to live right next to where the Hermes is, and I'm like, that's not me. I mean, I don't want to live, that's just not me. And it's the same transit line and all these little side pockets off East Williamsburg, the Concelia Street, DeVoe, Ainsley, Powers Street. I mean, they're just beautiful little bucolic blocks, and you still have all the same drivers. So nothing's cheap, but I still think it has room to run. And I especially like rent stabilized in these types of neighborhoods. Buying rent stabilized at cheap prices in the best neighborhoods, that seems like a very good bet. Maybe people never leave or whatever, but they're, the underlying land is worth 3 times what you're paying for the building.
Right.
So
You like development. I've noticed you're a lot more involved in that development landscape. I feel like Brooklyn right now I talk to brokers in Brooklyn, and it's incredible what you can get for land, right? In the Bronx, we're probably selling air rights at $80 to $100 a buildable. In Brooklyn, it's like where Midtown was a few years back, right? Or maybe above.
Some of the prices in Brooklyn for land are even higher than what you'd see in Manhattan, outside of like the Upper East and like where you got mega sellouts, because the cost of construction is a little bit cheaper and a little bit easier for somebody to build in Williamsburg.
Access is also right.
To not have to get into the city, deal a big truck, a crane, cement
trucks.
trucks.
10% you could shave.
I don't know what it actually is, but I know it's a pain in the ass to get into the city.
Yeah.
And so some of that, you'll have a site that you'll see on like West 22nd Street sell for $350 a buildable foot, and then in Williamsburg we'll sell one for $450 or $500 a buildable foot. And it's like, why? It's partly that. The boutique condo sellouts in Williamsburg and Greenpoint, for instance, are probably above $2,000 a foot if you do it right now. So in the condo market, you're seeing anywhere from $300 to $500 at the top. Rentals, I still feel like are a little bit challenged with the new 485X program. People don't quite know exactly how
they don't love it.
They
right?
don't. No, they definitely don't love it for anything large.
The 99 units is a serious thing. You've got developers putting 2, 3, 99 unit buildings beside each other, so they don't have to pay prevailing wage. Whatever you do, developers or any business person will find a way to operate within the rules. But so it's just like there's silly things like that. City of Yes seems to help, but again, I think it's early days, and I think for personally, it's just owners are like, you can build more. Why is it not worth more?
Right.
And you have to get into the nitty gritty of.
Oh yeah, the City of Yes. Let's talk about that, because if you're a broker out there, stop scamming all of our clients that we're calling, because they're like, I'm like, yeah, the FAR with the universal affordability preference, UAP booster of 20% more FAR, but if the FAR that you're improving the property is the affordable FAR, which is basically a net neutral, like you don't really gain anything by building it, you're just doing it for the tax abatement. That's not the same metric or value as like the market rate part of the development that you're building. So with all this parlance of what price per buildable some land sold, people are manipulating those numbers, and it's kind of like every time I have to explain to the owner, I'm like, when we talk about price per buildable, we're talking about the market rate portion of the buildable square foot. The affordable part, you're just building to get the tax abatement, but if you have to rent something at those levels, like the cost of construction, it's basically like a net neutral. It's like a wash. You're basically building it for free.
Apples to oranges, basically. Yes. It's the same cost to build it, but you can't monetize it in the same way as your market rate.
Yeah, correct. But going to the why is there a lot of development? I mean, I feel like that's the key. All the brain power of what wasn't rent regulated has shifted. If you really knew what you were doing, right, you kind of shifted either to a different state altogether, or you use that skill set of knowing how to renovate an existing building to new development. So you have a lot of very skilled builders in Brooklyn that used to do a different thing that are all concentrating on development. So that's great. That's a great story. I mean, if they just tweak the math again, you're going to see a lot more construction, which leads to a lot more affordability in general. But I just think the larger sites are having a hard time penciling. And then in the land kind of category of, like, let's call it the B markets, the Bed-Stuys, the Crown Heights, if it's just a rental area, I'd say it's somewhere like high 100s per buildable foot is where you can kind of pencil stuff, maybe low 200s. And if it's got a condo angle, it could be 275 to 300 in an area where you're selling condos for $1,400 a foot. So everything's, for the most part, people are still trying to build condos because it's a quicker exit. You don't have to deal with the regulations at the end of it. But if you can make sense of a rental and probably build into a 7.5% to 8% cap on cost, that's where the liquidity is. So you just got to kind of run the math. And for us brokers, it's always, do we put out a projected hard cost? Some guy can build for a lot cheaper than another guy. Depends on the finishes, depends on the quality of construction. If you're trying to just build it to flip it, you're going to, hire the cheapest, quickest, kind of guy. If you're going to hire it to own it for 15 years and you don't want things to break, you're going to pay a different price. So that's what's fun about development, is like the variables are all over the place.
Over the place.
And it takes a lot of chutzpah to like develop something. And you're also making a bet that we are in a supply constrained market. So if I can underwrite a site to $100 a foot on the rents today, I'm not going to be done for 3 years. If I look at the macro picture of New York City and the regulations, not creating more housing underneath me in all these existing buildings, why wouldn't I hope, or at least if I can make the numbers work at $100 a foot, that when I build it and I rent it, it's going to be $115 a foot. So, that's the general thesis. It's kind of like the regulations are helping the new development pricing. Overall, developers deserve every dollar of profit they can. There's so much that goes into that.
I tip my hat to any developer, especially condo developers. You're basically, it's so timing sensitive. If we move our analysis when we're valuing land, if we move it like 6 months right or left, all of a sudden the project is either in the black or in the red. Mm-hmm. So, and especially when you're trying to get that $2,000 a foot number or whatever that premium metric is. You're hoping that conditions then are the same as today.
Right.
Because we don't know, right? Nobody knows. But all you can do is put your math together, make an educated guess, and look at what's going on around you. And it feels like Brooklyn is as good a place as any, I feel like, to make those bets.
Yeah, no, I think there's a lot of growth. I would love to see more people, build rental buildings. And again, but at the same time, I feel like what they're competing with as far as LP capital is the land almost has to sell for a little cheaper, because you got to be able to build into an 7.5, in my opinion, to 8% cap on cost, minimum 7, because again, I'm selling those core plus buildings that were built 2 years ago today for a 6.5% cap rate in place. So if I'm an LP, a smart one at least, why am I taking the risk of development in 3 years of waiting when I can already, for a 50 basis point improvement of costs, when I can just buy core plus today?
And that brings us full circle to, buy existing today if you can, and skip all the drama and the heartache.
Yeah.
But listen, we could unpack this stuff all day. It's Friday in the summertime. I appreciate you coming in. You going to Montauk for the weekend? Or
no Montauk today. I'm about to be finished with the renovation project. It'll be interesting to see how the numbers all penciled out at the end. I'm going to share them with people, because I don't feel like people publish like what it costs to renovate these homes. I feel like it's $800 a square foot is my guess.
Yeah.
It's been fun, but it's I'm learning a lot. So at night right now, instead of tracking the comps, I'm watching YouTubes on how to build stuff and how to get through issues that are happening.
Nice.
So
Love
it's
that.
you got to keep
do
doing it. And renovating's fun. It's you can see, there's a reward at the end of it. So hopefully everyone that owns a building in New York City will be rewarded with some mechanism to improve their property soon.
Nice. And I was snooping around on your Instagram. You had a baby recently?
Yeah.
So is this your first Father's Day coming up?
Yeah, first Father's Day.
Well, happy Father's Day. Congrats to you.
Thank you. Work really hard early so you can make sure you see your kid every day at night.
100%. Love that. Shaun Riney, thank you so much.
Thanks, Brian.
Cheers.
See ya.